Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Business Over Breakfast. That's focused on disambiguating agility and resilience. And I'm not sure I can actually spell that word without looking it up. But anyway, thank goodness for spell check. In a world defined by rapid change, uncertainty, and complexity, the ability to respond effectively is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Organizations and leaders alike are being tested not just on how fast they can move, but on how well they can adapt and evolve. Terms like agility and resilience have become part of our everyday business vocabulary, yet their meanings, their implications are often very blurry. Today's session invites us to pause and reflect around what do we really mean when we talk about agility and resilience? How do these qualities manifest in leadership, and how do they shape the systems that we rely on? And perhaps most critically, why do these traits remain so elusive? Joining me today are two of my favorite people that I have known for 6 years since I joined Emory. Steve Walton is a professor in the practice of information systems and operations management here at Goizueta Business School. He teaches across all of the degrees and non-degree programs on topics such as strategic problem solving, critical thinking and decision making, physiology of leadership, and operations management. His research interests include the impact of stress and nutrition on decision-making patterns, of how business models get disrupted, and the implications of leading-edge technology on how firms execute strategy. Joining us too is Amy Gregg, who's most recently served as Senior Vice President for Supply Chain and Information Technology at International Paper Company, prior to which she held several commercial leadership roles in the organization. She's also been involved in a number of civic organizations, including American Forest and Paper Association as the chairman for the containerboard sector, and as director on the Women's Foundation for a Greater Memphis. We're also most grateful for Amy as she lends her expertise and perspective to the Goizueta Corporate Advisory Board. Together, Amy and Steve co-facilitate sessions on supply chain leadership and agility and resilience. As with each of our webinars, Amy and Steve will spend about 35 or so minutes giving their insights on the topic of agility and resilience. And then please put your questions in the Q&A box, and they'll do their best to answer them towards the end of the session. But before I hand over to Steve and Amy, I want to shine a light on an upcoming executive education course that, like agility and resilience, should be of interest to all business professionals today, and that is change. And more specifically, leading change. Most of us have been introduced to Carter's change model. Our Navigating Change for Growth course goes beyond that, introduces new research on how successful change leaders actually operate. It also goes beyond theory, as each participant works on their specific change initiative during the course. So you come away with new insight about how to plan and successfully execute your change agenda. So I think Jan or someone's going to put the information about that course up in the chat. So please take a look at that. That's such an important skill and capability for leaders today. With that said, I am going to hand over to Amy and Steve.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicola. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I saw from Southern California to Nassau in our group today. Great to have you all here. So Nicola did a good job of pronouncing disambiguating, and it's really difficult to spell, but it seems like a really good place to start with what are we actually talking about? So I thought for just a second, I'd tell you kind of a funny story. A few years ago, I was teaching at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and we were talking, it was a strategy session, and we were talking about, of all things, SWOT analysis. Now, with all of your experience, I'm sure you're familiar with SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Well, I was teaching a group of scientists and engineers that were responsible for sort of strategy setting in the labs. And as we were talking, they wanted to ask questions about SWOT. And because I had just said, y'all know what SWOT analysis is. And they were like, yeah, totally, we know. Well, they started asking me questions that I had never heard before. I've been a college professor for 30 years, and their questions were just right over my head. And I couldn't answer them. And after a while, I was like, let's just keep going. We can talk about SWOT later. Well, as it got to lunchtime, I had a chance to take the tour of the museum at the labs and came across this. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but when they say SWOT analysis, they mean surface water and ocean topography. We weren't even talking the same thing, but we had no idea that we were talking different stories altogether. See, this is the idea of disambiguation. Sometimes we use terms presuming that others know exactly what we're talking about. Sometimes we use terms thinking that they mean the same thing to the other people as it means to us. This is super risky. So when you start to think about this idea of disambiguation, what it's intended to do is to sort of surface unstated assumptions. Like, here's a big one. I'm talking about business. They're talking about oceans. And this need for disambiguation hides under this idea of what seems to be obvious to everybody. What does that word mean? What are the working relationships? And I know this happens all the time in your life as well. I'm sure you've been in conversations with somebody that you thought you were talking about the same thing, but then a little bit later you realize that maybe you're having completely different conversations. It happened here in my house just the other day. I was about to go to the grocery store. I was like, Vicky, do you want me to get more tomatoes? She looks at me and she says, we have 2 tomatoes. Well, that's an ambiguous answer. It happens all the time, right? We share a fact. That fact then has to be translated. And so really stopping and asking, what does that mean? What risks do we face if we're actually having 2 separate conversations is actually a super useful leader strategy, decision-making strategy. And it's why we want to stop and really dig into what do we mean by agility and resilience? Nicholas said it. These terms are thrown around all the time in business. And listening to the different organizations that we work with then discuss agility and resilience, I'm pretty sure that there's not a common definition across organizations and even sometimes within organizations. So if we're really going to help organizations develop a capability around agility and resilience, really understand what are the skills that we need, we kind of need to step back for just a second and make sure we understand what agility is, and what resilience is, how they're related to each other. Only when we've taken that step can we take the really practical step of then what does that mean for skills that we would need to embed inside the organizations? Now, we'll develop this framework around agility and resilience kind of in a general way. As we come towards the end of our time together, we're going to focus on a particular issue so you can see how it plays out in practice. We'll take agility and resilience and aim them at supply chain so that you can really start to understand how, when we really can be clear about agility and resilience and what those are, and then describe the skills that bring it to life, we can see how to really use it. So that's where we're heading as we go through the day today. So I want to give you a question and give you a second to think about this question. What exactly is agility? What exactly is resilience? So here's what I want you to do. Let's take them one at a time. For just a second, I want you to think what to you is agility, and then I'll ask you to put some ideas in the chat. We'll talk about that for just a minute. Then we'll do the same thing with resilience. So if you would, for just a second, when you hear the term agility, what comes to your mind? Flexibility, that's a big part of it. Adaptability, love that. Change in direction, oh, nimble, that's great. Oh, there's one, to sense change and adapt, I love that. Pivot. Oh, there's a different one. Somebody says strength. All the others were about sort of the ability to move in different directions. This one brings up a different idea. What's the role of strength in flexibility? Okay, move quickly. That brings up another idea. Is it speed? Oh, then Marietta relates that into decision making, fast thinking. Zakia. So what's really interesting about that is the idea of I have to be able to sense the environment to decide how to be adaptable. It's not just the ability to adapt, it's the ability to adapt to some sort of stimulus. Love it. Oh, balance. See, there's an interesting thing. We talk about agility, but we don't stop and talk about stability. If you think about an athlete as an example, look at an athlete, for example, is a basketball player is about to shoot a free throw. They're very intentional about creating a stable platform before they move. Love it. Love it. We'll put all those together into maybe a clear definition in just a couple of minutes. So let's go on to the other. Really quickly, what are words or phrases that are different from what you used for agility that you would use to describe resilience? Okay, overcome. See, but if you say ability to adapt, that feels a lot like agility. Bounce back. Love that. Oh, there's something interesting. Ability to go back to a normal state. Oh, persistence. I think that's a big part of the story, right? If you think about what it is to bounce back, it's not necessarily easy. Loving that. Sustained performance under pressure. That's interesting. Love it. Okay, so if it's all right, let me modify the question. If you think about athletes and whatever sport is interesting to you, can you name a couple of athletes that you think are sort of hallmarks of agility? Who might be an athlete that when you use the term agile, that athlete comes to your mind? I'd love it if you drop some ideas. Simone Biles, she always comes up super quickly, right? Think about the way she's able to move her body in midair. Kyrie Irving, yeah. There's a bit of a throwback with Bo Jackson. I'd love to see a couple of more. Calvin Johnson, the wide receiver from Georgia Tech, Megatron, that one. Yeah. Steph Curry. It usually doesn't take long. Oh, Dion. Back before it was Coach Dion, Dion the athlete. Yeah. Who is it? Barry Sanders. Think of the ankle breaker, right? Barry Sanders. Right. So this is perfect. But what's really interesting, I want you to think about kind of the physical characteristics of many of the athletes that you describe. There we go. Saquon Barkley. Uh, Here's what I want well, let's talk about these. Steph Curry is built for a particular type of agility, right? He can move fast. He can move in many directions. He's able to change the plane of direction. Then he's able to stop and change his body position so rapidly. Clearly agility. But I want you to think for a second. I'd argue that big old Dex is also agile. So Dexter Lawrence, former Clemson football player, plays for the Giants, is enormous. He's almost twice Steph Curry's weight. But if you watch him play, his ability to move his body over relatively short distances, but to move his body in a fashion that he can overcome double team blocks, it's really quite incredible. I would say Dex is equally agile. He's just built to be agile in a different way. And so you start to think about what kinds of characteristics are important to be agile. Yeah, for his size and weight, he is crazy in the way he can move. Now, it's interesting. I see somebody mentioned Usain Bolt. I think there's some interesting stuff there. Uh, Maybe Amy, you could comment on maybe a different perspective on agility.
Sure. I was thinking about how we compare and contrast a lot of these different athletes. And one area that comes to mind, and Usain Bolt kind of brings it up, but it's also running and running for distance. A lot of times we talked about speed and quickness, but actually, if you think and you step back, you can apply agility and resilience to marathon runners. And Steve, you're gonna have to help me click because I lost it. Oh, no, it came back. Um, if you don't know, we want to introduce you to Kelvin Kipton. He was one of the youngest and holds the world record in marathons. He almost broke 2 hours. I think the actual record's 2 hours, 1 minute, and 35 seconds. And he holds three of the seven best times in marathons. But you think about it, and yes, he's running at the same amount of distance every single time. But what you run in London or what you run in Chicago or what you run in an altitude where he grew up versus what you run in sea level all take different types of skills and endurance, persistence, a lot of the words that we saw the group describe. Even you think about going in and you have the course map. You have a map one day, you're studying it, you're preparing for it. Something happens, a water main break in Boston, and you have to think about how you pivot and how you react to that. Another more, I would say intangible but personal is some days you wake up and your body is prepared and recovered. I think about some of the tennis examples I saw, and people bring their A games, and then the next time you see about, my body didn't show up for me today. So you think of Yannick Sinner, and he has not had that resilience after he's bounced back after some cramps, things like that. So really, it's a different type of agility and resilience that you need for each individual activity or sport. You compare and contrast Kelvin with Usain Bolt, and it's really fascinating. I mean, Steve, what is your fun fact on Usain and how long he's actually run?
Yeah, his entire running career is just over 1 hour.
And every single race Kelvin has run has been over 2 hours. I mean, but at the same time, Usain's dealing with the people in the lanes behind him, next to him. He's dealing with the elements, the weather. He's dealing with his body, and he's having to adjust, and he's having to think through what is the same today and what is different today, and how do I continue to enhance my performance despite all those changes and variables. Anything else you'd add, Steve?
Nope, perfect.
I am trying to navigate. Let's see if the button's going to let me go. Oh. Steve and I were talking to another group one time, and it really gave us a different perspective. Oops.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's not just about the athlete or the team member or the stakeholder on the field. It's also about the position on the field. And it's not just what they do during the game, but also before the game. And we were talking to a group and why the baseball diamond was different. Out of curiosity, real quickly, can somebody pick one player on the field that has a different perspective than all of the others that are playing in the field? I would say playing defense. Yes. Thank you. The catcher. You really think about it, the catcher is the navigator, the director. They're looking at the field, they're looking at the entire arena or context from a totally different angle. Also in preparation, they have to learn more about the opposing players. They have to prepare themselves. They have to prepare, okay, this player is going to normally likes this type of ball. They like this the inside, the outside of the plate, etc. This player is likely to bunt. And you really think about perspective. It's not very same in our organizations and our teams. We're dealing with these teams and we're building these teams that all have different perspectives, different sets of experiences, and how do you bring it all together and think about everybody's position in the field in order to help everybody become agile and resilient. So thank you for all your participation in our group chat. So if we'll go ahead to the next page and we'll put some more clear definitions around this for you. If I can navigate. We use a lot of sports examples, but really there's another great example out in nature. And I would say Mother Nature or nature exhibits a lot of these characteristics often in different arenas. But you think about the cheetah, and really the cheetah shows agility through speed, strength, flexibility, as well as cognition. It's one of those, they really have to see what is going on in their arena. Is there a another animal that is a threat to them? Is there another animal that is a resource for energy or food? and they have to be ready to pivot or move based on all of the different variables that they're experiencing at one given time. Steve?
Oh, it's a funny build. Stand by.
There you go. Second, and again, I think we're practicing agility. We normally do this together in person, and now we're both driving, so thank you for your patience. And then going to resilience, a lot of times you have the previous or you're recovering or you're bouncing back, as many people highlighted. And when you think about that, you think about
Amy, I'll take us to the right slide.
okay. Yeah, I quit touching.
Is that the one where you want to be?
Yes, please. And you think about it, and it's a function of the adaptability, emotional regulation. I think somebody put in the comments, emotional regulation, or your how you act or how you lead or how you behave under pressure. That is a huge piece here. Do you create a sense of environment where people can make mistakes? Or under pressure, do you create a sense of environment or fear? So really emotional regulation, it's often not talked about in resilience, but it is I can set aside the emotion, not set it aside, but I can process the emotion, I can label the emotion, and I can keep it from not deterring me, or I can bounce back from that emotional state very quickly. We talked already about perspective. Your perspective, think about people saying hindsight 2020 or, postmortem. You can't always have that perspective. Sometimes people focus, for example, so much on the result of a decision. Your decision could have been good based on the perspective and the information you had at a given moment. But somebody may label it a failure because they were focusing on the result. Doesn't mean you made a bad decision. You just didn't get the likely outcome that you thought you were going to get. I would say the last but not least that we want to highlight is their capacity to recover. If you have a workforce or a team that is already at capacity, their likelihood of them being resilient in a disrupted moment goes down. A lot of times you see somebody already working to the max, and then their ability to react to something or to bounce back for something has it's a much more difficult. Even think about it with in your own personal lives, and you think about your body. If I have overtaxed my body for over a week, it's going to take me longer to bounce back than if I overtax my body, I recover appropriately, and then I go and I do something else again. Our brains and our teams and living organisms work the same way. So as you think about resilience, yes, think about adaptability and endurance, persistence, a lot of things that we talked about. But we really also want to insert emotional regulation, perspective, and that capacity to recover, whether it be physical or even in, say, a supply chain. You have a wide spot in the road in your supply chain where you have some high risk areas or areas that are likely to be disrupted. Steve, you want to go ahead one more slide?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this is a funky build. Let's see what happens.
It is.
There we go.
For those who definitely want more a more clarifying definition, this is how we put agility: a rapid whole body movement with change of velocity or direction in response to a stimulus. I know we use a lot of different sports analogies, but a stimulus could be something such as the weather, so change in tax policy, a change in consumer response, or consumer preference. So think about that word stimulus and the ability to change or sense it and change direction as required. You guys nailed it in the activity: blend of speed, strength, creativity. Sometimes is overlooked. Sometimes you think about standard operating procedures or SOPs. People don't think they have the creativity. That's the way it's always been done. Sometimes that creativity can challenge those standard operating procedures and get you to a better outcome. Must be trained in before is a huge piece. I think a lot about agility that I saw and experienced in a role during the pandemic, both agility and resilience, And I think about that, and the team had a very, very strong culture for caring for each other and a very strong culture for safety. And because their training and this culture was there, plus a lot of training had been done around business continuity, the need and the ability to be agile when the pandemic hit was definitely, there was a good foundation there from those other two adjacencies around caring for each other and safety. And that training really helped people say, I don't have the full picture of how I need to pivot or how we need to flex or adapt, but it gave us a good foundation to fill in the blanks instead of starting from scratch. So again, it needs to be trained and practiced. It's one of those practicing and then versus reading on a paper are two totally different things, because it can definitely help you find those gaps.
Amy, before we go on, there's actually an arc that's in the both chat and Q&A that is on point for the conversation that we're having. Would it be okay if I took a second and talked about this? Excuse me, I'm so sorry. All right, so let me describe the arc, and it is exactly in this moment of what we're talking about that I think these come together. So Dr. G in the chat describes how flexible risk management with frameworks, decision-making frameworks for clarity. I want y'all to all hold the idea of in what ways does organizational decision-making either enhance or limit agility. So there's a really big idea from Dr. G's post that I want you to hold on to. What's the role of our decision-making processes in agility? Then Elaine also in the chat says, what about contingency planning? Gosh, what a great question, right? One trains agility in the planes of motion one feels one needs to be able to move, right? So an athlete will practice lateral movements, for example, because their sport requires they move laterally. If you're a player that your position requires you to move backwards, you practice backwards motion, right? So part of developing agility is understanding in what directions you feel like you might need to be able to move. Right, and in a way, Elaine, that's this idea of contingency planning. Now, the question that's in the chat is so on point to what Amy has on the screen right here, or sorry, in the Q&A. Noting the point on capacity in relation to agility, how do you handle this in a business environment where persons are encouraged to work at or near their maximum? Oh, this is the whole point. If you want to take a physical example and a business example, you can do that. Physically, as Amy said earlier, if you're exercising to your full ability that you can exercise and you're giving it every day as much as you can give, well, first, you've got your body in a state of constant inflammation. That's associated with atherosclerosis, heart disease, right? So it turns out that running at your max capacity physiologically is bad for you. Equally organizationally, right? So this idea of do more with less is actually kind of a toxic idea physically, right? It's damaging to the body. So if you've got an organization that everybody's running to their max, you by definition are making agility almost impossible to achieve, right? Because agility requires training before you need it, and it requires practice. If you've got people working all the time, do you see the challenge? It will be difficult to actually be agile if you have no buffer, right? So this is a couple of really important ideas. What's our role in decision making? Have we thought about where we need to be agile? Are we creating enough space for our people and therefore our organization to be agile? Amy, thank you for letting me do that, right? Like I said, I saw this arc that was just dead on point to what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. And no, I think that is perfect. And there's another question in the chat around, does this deprecate SOPs? In some instances, yes, it can. It's one of those, going back to being training and practicing, it's what are those things that are negotiable and what are those non-negotiable? And in the statement by Dr. G talks about, the clarity and the opportunities and the frameworks. You can't possibly, especially in today's business environment, put every single variable in place and make an SOP for every single thing that can happen. But what are those things that are, must and non-negotiables? And what are those things where you can be flexible, where you can be agile at speed and at the right time, and as was already said, in the right direction. And I love how the other comment with better with less. It's really focusing on those things that are going to make it better, and you're going to have to make the trade-offs. There's definitely trade-offs when you practice agility and resilience. You're going to have to make, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But really, it is how do I get the better outcome with less resources or exertion?
I'd like to add just a really quick additional perspective on SOPs, and then we'll go on to talking about what agility is. If you think about how the military trains soldiers, they're training them to be, well, they're training in SOPs as when I see a particular situation emerge in combat, here's how I should respond, right? So the whole point of that deep training is to create muscle memory for the soldiers. It's the same idea as an SOP. When you see this happen, do the following things. Now, the reason why they do that is obviously soldiers are operating in a dynamic environment where things are changing. By having SOPs for this body of work, how they react in certain instances, they're able to use the remaining cognitive space that they've got to monitor the outside world to recognize when they need to change tactics. So it turns out when you blend SOPs, clarity about how to act in a set of conditions, with the ability to scan the external environment and realize when to shift to different SOPs, that's kind of power, right? That's where agility really comes to life.
Great example. We talked a lot about this already, but if you would like a clearer definition, resilience, ability to bounce back from adversity and maintain the psychological and physical well-being. The blend of endurance, emotional regulation, adaptability, perspective. But like we talked about before, this also needs to be developed and practiced in order for it to come out in the right times, not after the fact. The last concept on this page we'll leave you with is when you think about agility, agility is often can be described as offensive, and then resilience is typically defensive when you think about bouncing back from adversity. Agility is more, hey, I think about I'm preparing for this tennis match or I'm preparing for this board meeting. Hey, if the board decides this is the hot topic of the day, I'm going to be agile and pivot with them this way. But if it's this, I'm going to go and I'm going to answer this other question. So it's really thinking about, if you're not sure, think about offensive and defensive, and they do blend together. One of the questions that we have often gotten is what skills do I need to enable both agility and resilience? We tried to bucketize these and think about the attributes and characteristics for you to think about and to think about with your teams. We already talked quite a bit about speed and strength. And one of the things in strength is you need both generalist and you need to attract talent and expertise and reliability and security. So it's not just strength in numbers. It's also what type of strength do I have and expertise? What expertise can I buy versus what do I have to have in house is another great example. A flexible example for agility, you think about modular processes and systems. Steve just described modular processes with modular SOPs. In this situation, I'm going to use this playbook. In this situation, we're going to use this playbook. But also one of the hot topics, as we all know right now, is AI. A lot of people are thinking about these systems and these processes in AI and think about what is modular. So what can I add on and what can I take off because it does work and it doesn't work, instead of making huge bets on everything at once. Scenario planning is an awesome tool. It takes time and investment in resources, but we highly encourage that. Taking portfolio views of things such as your supply chain. One question that I often ask myself and continue to ask myself is, hey, where am I? I'm a customer. Am I the supplier's number one customer, or am I one of their third tier customers? Do I need to do something differently the next time we negotiate a contract so I can build more agility in my supply chain? Because if I'm a third or fourth tier customer, I'm probably not going to get what I need in a time of disruption. So what am I willing to give, or what am I willing to do to move myself up in line in case of disruption? without breaking the bank. On the resilient side, endurance, you read a lot of different articles, and you do a lot of different research. Financial reserves and buffers are huge. Who's over leveraged, who's not. Where do I need resource redundancy? When you talk about lean and you talk about Six Sigma and just in time, a lot of times the first thing is where you need to go cut this. Well, yes, but in some cases you might actually need extra parts because they're hard to get from here, or I need this extra talent because yes, I have the capacity right now, but if I open these two new facilities, I'm going to need some more redundancy, especially in times of high stress. I got a question on emotional regulation around morale-based intercoms, uh, intercoms. Wow, internal communications. And to clarify that one a little bit more, a lot of times it's about really reading the room, reading the team, reading the audience and the context. It's really understanding what people are feeling and how they're coping with a certain situation. Transparency and integrity here are already assumed, but morale is really thinking about what is going on, how can I help the morale, and on not being tone deaf. Sometimes leaders see it and they'll walk in and be rah 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 cheerleader, and everybody's looking at them like, I don't want to follow them right now because they cannot relate to what we're really going through. So that's I have probably said way too much on this page already. Steve, what would you like to add, and what examples do you have?
Oh, I just have one or two thoughts. If you look across many of the things that we've listed on this slide, you see that idea of strategic buffers show up again, right? If every resource that you've got is running at 110%, then you have no buffer to train these in, to practice these skills, right? There's a comment in the chat about the narrative in startups is pushing the always working, always busy thing. It's not just startups, right? I'm sure you've been in a development environment, like a corporate training environment, where when you should have been paying attention in the training, you were being pulled by your job because the expectation is even if you were in this training environment, you should be available to us. And so this idea of strategic buffers, I think, is really important. The other is think about the role of decision making. I asked you to consider this a minute ago. A couple of days, somebody used the phrase, we have a tendency to push information to authority, which is an upward push of information. What if we thought about pushing authority down to information, right? Which is the idea of making more decentralized decision-making processes, finding the correct place where the decision ought to be made. But you can see this requires a couple of things. It requires training for people to be able to do that, which again, the only way you can do these things is by having a strategic buffer of capacity, whether it's bandwidth for the people, whether it's literally additional inventory if you're in a manufacturing or retail type of environment, right? Strategic buffers. Darren, thank you. I think it's a really important idea as well, right? This whole idea of strategic buffers is really important.
Thank you, Steve. One other I would highlight is embracing interdependencies and the perspective. For those of you in heavy manufacturing and you think about safety and you think about interdependencies in these places, and a lot of times, a lot of people think, okay, I have a team member who's hurt and there's something right in front of them hurt them. There's all of these interdependencies, and it's often something above them, behind them, or below them that they couldn't see or didn't sense that really got them injured. And it goes the same with our teams. A lot of times you see better outcomes, especially when you're bouncing back for something. If, say, I'm in a supply chain and the transaction or the impact of what happened before and what happens after my role is really understood and understand the interdependencies, I have a better likely of a better outcome. When things are siloed off and I only take the perspective of my little world, resilience becomes much more difficult. And it's much more difficult to understand the trade-offs and the second order or unintended consequences or effects.
Amy, are you ready to go on to
Yes.
describing how this might play in a supply chain?
Yes. So when you read articles, when you go online, you see so much of the resilience and agility brought up in the world of supply chain. On the right is a great example. It's not a chain. It's not linear. Steve found this example from KKR. This is Motorola's supply web, and it's an open system that is completely dynamic. You move one of those dots, all of those other dots rearrange. So think about taking out one of your biggest suppliers or taking out one of your biggest talents. All of those dots are going to readapt and change based on what's going on. You think about what's going on right now with whether you pick tariffs or Taiwan, these dots are all moving to different regions of the world right now. So it's because of that kind of amoeba or moving and dynamic state, it's very difficult to think about it in supply chain. So we wanted to help you break it down. Really, you can categorize it in a couple of big segments and then some smaller segments. Think about those technical reasons. Yes, it's a complex web, it's susceptible to disruption. I'm going to have uncertainty no matter what, and I am going to have ambiguity no matter what because I cannot see complete visibility. And sometimes that is going to create capability, and sometimes that's going to create a constraint. It can be anything from an on-time delivery to a shortage of parts. I should have put the picture in here, but I was traveling the other day, and I think I've been to the airport 4 times in the last 30 to 60 days, and every single time the moving sidewalk is out of service because waiting for parts because of supply chain. It's also the technical reasons could be a short-term task, such as an inventory decision, or I had enough capacity of my own trucks, but I didn't have a secondary outside vendor available. That can create the stability I need, but then again, it could also create risk. So think about your decisions and your task in the short term and a long term. But a lot of times, if somebody is disconnected from strategy, you will see a negative impact from the short term and the long term. The next is a big segment is leadership reasons. For better or worse, our decisions shape the system. Even questions that we ask can shape the system. If we ask the same question over and over again to a specific team, they're going to either knowingly or unknowingly start to always react to that question because they think it's important to you. The decision that we make on this one supplier might put us out of the running with another supplier or customer, not just for the near term, but for the long term. I had some customers that we would say that they have 20-year memories. I'm like, I wasn't in this role 20 years ago. I can't change that, but here's what I can change. The system shape determines how it behaves. If you've traveled recently, think about if I flew Delta or if I flew Southwest. Their boarding process, their structure of their boarding process really shapes how all of these passengers behave, which in turn, you see something else get added or something get changed because of those behaviors and how passengers adapt. And then the airline's like, I didn't see that coming. So now I'm going to add the red line that says, please wait here. If you've flown lately, you've probably seen that. The hardest part is there's no right answer. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to every single thing. I saw maintain in there. There's going to always be a conflict in the supply chain. Think about if I'm a maintenance department, I want the machines down or I want access to XYZ, as much as I can so I can be as reliable as possible because I'm measured on reliability. On the flip side, if I am in logistics, I'm going to be measured on cost, or I'm going to be measured on on-time delivery or quality in full. So depending on those different decisions and how you decide to measure your teams, how you decide to measure success or results, or how you decide to incent, there's not a right answer. You have to make the balance and you have to make the trade-offs for what's important for you in your organization, your team, and yourself at that given moment in time. We could go on forever because this is a very complex web, but at least we're trying to leave you with some technical reasons and some leadership reasons as you make decisions in these difficult times, some categories and some areas to think about and to step back and to ponder with your teams in order to adjust and to move on.
Amy, there's a question in the Q&A window that's on point for the slide here, so I thought I'd raise it and give you a chance to think about it. One of our participants is working on a research project and was interested in the idea is resilience about recovery from a disruptive event. he says that he rarely sees that as the way businesses think about recovery from disruptions. Why do you think this is that businesses, especially within a supply chain context, talk about the recovery stage and while mainly focusing on detection and prevention?
Um,
There's an extension to the question, what type of information do you think businesses need to focus on from the disruptive event, maybe in preparation for it or to be able to recover from it?
sure. One of the examples, it's actually supply chain related and IT related, is really think about cybersecurity. So think about what information do I require when I'm sourcing from a supplier prior to an incident regarding their cybersecurity practices and their contacts and etc. Or what supplier do I pick to be somebody to help me recover because I don't have the capacity to recover everything by myself. Um, when I think about cyber, I think about it because of how the world has changed. It's not about when you get attacked at this point. It's about you're going to get attacked. So how do I recover from it? Yes, there's a lot of training. There's a lot of things done in systems. There's a lot of different, you think about multi-factor authentication that's preventative and proactive. Uh, tabletop exercises with lead teams and with boards of directors to saying if this happens and we get ransomware, are we willing to pay? If we're not, if we are willing to pay, at what level are we willing to pay? Who do we need to contact, say in the FBI, etc. In your business continuity plans, contingency planning, yes, it's there. I think it's just with so much uncertainty, ambiguity, and the speed of change right now, it's accepting the fact that stuff is going to happen. And so yes, I can put all the resources on it not happening, but it gets so expensive to the point you can't even operate your business. So I have to say, I'm going to accept here's the things that might happen or will likely happen. So how do I think about being resilient when they do happen? Um, some of it you can't predict, but those things that are likely to happen, how do I think about what is likely to happen? What is my risk tolerance? Some things you might say, that's not a big deal. I'm not going to do anything about it. There's other things I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to go hire XYZ firm to help me in the recovery process. And so it is both. You do hear more about the recovery side and the bouncing back side, but also in the supply chain context, a lot of times that's where the I would say actionable items show up. So something happens over here, it shows somewhere else in the web, and then you know how to act on it. Um, or the lingering impacts. So something that only lasts, say, 2 days could have a lingering impact in the supply chain for months to come. You saw that in the port, a port strike. You think about that and how long the port strike actually lasts versus the knock-on effects and the impacts. And so it's really weighing both the proactive and the cost of being proactive, and then weighing also the reactive and or the likelihood it's just going to happen. So how do I go ahead and figure out how to recover? I know it's a long-winded answer, but it's also a balance of trade-offs and complexity that is dependent on every situation.
So I'd offer one thought, and then so we have time for questions. We'll move on to sort of conclude our comments. Inside the world of physical recovery, because the question was about recovery versus planning and preparation, there's an entire discipline that's emerged that's called prehab, not rehab, but prehab. A lot of testing is done on athletes to find where their most likely weakness point is that would lead to an injury in the future. Then they build an entire plan of strengthening flexibility, mobility to make it so that weakness ceases to be a weakness. It may never become a strength, but it ceases to be a weakness or an exposure. So when you think about it, there's always this delicate balance between planning so that I know what to expect and taking actions to be ready in case, sort of the contingency stuff that somebody brought up in the chat earlier. Within, if something bad does happen, how are we able then to recover as quickly as possible? So Amy, maybe you can give your thoughts on this one. I'll add a thought or two, and then we can just open up to questions.
Sure. As we reflect, we talked a lot about a lot of ambiguous and complex things. And really, when you step back and you think about it, cultures, strategies, mindsets are all influenced by these environmental dynamics, the actors, and not just the actors, but their beliefs and their actions. And as you are, where you might be feeling pressure and you're feeling something and something is there, you can really start to think about breaking it down into these three kind of areas and then sub segment it. Hey, is my organization ready? Are my teams ready? Am I ready as an individual? And really, what dynamics am I thinking about? Today, we focus a lot on the organization and the uncertainty and agility and resilience. But again, we saw lots of comments in the chat about risk, and we talked a little bit about stability. All of those things come into play, and this is a great way to really think about how you break it down. And I know Steve has some more thoughts on this page as well. Steve?
So the way that I would offer for you to think about this slide is, where do you see for your organization the greatest opportunities to enter into some kind of development activity? It's not necessarily training, but maybe what's the capability you feel you need to develop most? And so as I read kind of across the slide, who should we focus on? Should we focus at an organizational level, a team level, or maybe it's an individual's level? That might sound like our leaders need to be better able to. And again, we're not trying to be complete in our list. We're focusing on skills required for agility and resilience. So who needs to have better understanding or tools to deal with, let's say, uncertainty? And so what that might sound like is, using the ones that Amy's got blocked out here, our organization struggles with dealing with uncertainty. We want to have certainty in all of our estimates before we're really willing to make a decision. That causes us to be very slow, and it causes us to drive information up to authority, which then has impacts on the quality of our decisions. In order to accomplish what? So again, our organization struggles with uncertainty, which causes us to not be agile because we're unable to make decisions quickly. So you can use this table over here, in a sense, to do a bit of diagnosis about where do you think targeted development of capabilities would be most useful for your organization. Just to give you a way to think about, because the outside environment impacts actors like teams and individuals as we're trying to achieve things inside the organization, where's a good place for you to put your focus? Just something for you to consider. So we have a couple of minutes. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A box. If you have others, if you would drop them in the Q&A box, that would be great. Amy, there's one that I think you and I might have slightly different takes on. So let's start with it. One of our participants asks, how do you see the scenarios changing in the AI automation chat GPT times, which are upon us even right now? So what are your thoughts?
I would say that the level of uncertainty of what to do is going higher and higher because it's all changing so fast. I would say that it's one of those where um, people are asking a lot about their skill set, and it's change it's changing so fast. It's one of those you have to dip your toes in it, and you have to really think about how you're communicating to the organization. This is what's acceptable. This is not what's acceptable. But really, the best practice that I have experienced and I continue to observe is really stepping back and saying, what problem or what opportunity am I trying to solve for? And then trying to match the right technology to do it. A lot of the technology that might be the answer is technology that it's been around with AI since, the 70s or 80s, not new agentic activity. It's also about not losing the soft skills and also really thinking about critical thinking. All of these new tools are trained by humans, and you need to make sure they're trained on the right things, but two, the soft skills and the critical thinking continue to be important for the workforce and may not be something that AI can do well. I'm not sure that really answered the question, but
No, I feel like it did. So places where Amy and I totally agree, and then maybe the little bit of skeptic in me. So understanding categories of AI, I think, is a really important idea. We use AI, and I think a lot of times what people mean is generative AI. So let's separate out machine learning, agentic AI as kind of a different category, because that's another set of discussions that we'd have to have. Another thing that I agree 100% with Amy about is, in every instance, it's still a person making the decisions, a human in the loop, or in many instances, there continues to be a human in the loop. So this idea, Tammy says it in the chat, agreeing with Amy, the soft skills, they're so hard to do. Critical thinking, systems thinking, etc. So now the sort of skeptic in me, just a couple of pieces of data for you. There's a recent article that was published that says only about 40% of senior executives are satisfied with the return on investment into artificial intelligence, right? So we're not seeing a lot of, that's the right way to put it, impact that satisfies the executive suite for the work that's being done with AI. Similarly, I'm sure you're familiar with Gartner's hype curve. If not, you should Google it after we're done today. AI, I think, is kind of right at the peak of hype, right? What comes next in their cycle is the trough of disillusionment, right? And so I think that, like many technologies, we're still trying to get our hands around what to do with it. Great quote from Bill Gates that captures the essence. We tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term while underestimating its impact in the long term. So Gartner's hype cycle, JC. And so I think that in the long run, AI is going to change so many different things. I think it's just not going to be as fast as people expect. And so I just put that out as a thought for you. As AI is, in fact, changing everything, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not going to change, at least in the short term, and being attentive to that. So Amy, I think it's probably about time that we should hand it back to Heather and Jen for their sort of last comments.
I agree. Thank you all for your time this morning. Enjoyed it. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you both so much. Thanks, Amy and Steve. And thanks to the audience. I really appreciate both of you sharing your expertise today, but I also appreciate how engaged and interactive the audience was with the conversation. So really appreciate that today. Hey everyone, my name is Heather Dufault and I am part of the open enrollment team at the Goizueta Business School. And we so appreciate that you spend your morning with us. We hope that you'll join us next on our next Business Over Breakfast on November 6th. That's the risks of offering free goods and services with Salani Bastani. So here's something. If you are looking for ways to spend your professional development or tuition reimbursement dollars before the end of the year, we have a few short courses for you to consider. So first up in November, we have Navigating Change for Growth. Nicola spoke about this earlier in the program. In this course, you'll develop a strategic plan with measurable goals for an identified change initiative. This course is a 2-day change leadership intensive where you will apply course insights directly to your own change initiative with expert guidance and collaboration. And you'll have the opportunity to work with an elite cohort of professional cohorts across industries to expand your influence beyond the classroom. You'll leave the course with budget templates, a finance glossary, and a digital badge for your LinkedIn. For a limited time, your investment for this course is only $19.95, so $1,995. That's a discounted rate for this upcoming course. Also in November, we have Finance and Accounting for Non-Financial Managers. This is a course that's meant to help business leaders from non-financial backgrounds decipher the language of financial statements, examine sources of data, and explore analysis techniques to help you see beyond the numbers and uncover key measures from organizational performance. Like the Navigating Change for Growth course, for a limited time, the investment for this course is only $19.95. And for those of you who are considering a professional path as an executive coach, please consider our upcoming virtual executive coaching program. We have another fantastic cohort starting in January. And for those of you who may be already coaching but are looking for some business support with your business, your coaching business, you won't want to miss our new Business of Coaching Strategies to Boost Your Coaching Business webinar series in January and February of 2026. So please see the email on the screen. Also, information on these courses, upcoming courses, will be in chat. If you need any information, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would certainly love to see you on the next BOB and in our classrooms. So again, thanks for spending your morning with us. Again, our next BOB is coming up November 6th. And Halloween is coming. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.